May 8, 1945. The day Germany learned it had lost. May the 8th. It began like any other morning, grey, silent, soaked in smoke. But within hours, the air itself changed. Across radios that still worked in the ruins, a trembling voice spoke words that froze a nation. Germany has surrendered. Millions heard them, few believed them. For 6 years, the war had been their entire world. Now, with a single announcement, that world vanished. In the east, near Dresden, Sergeant Karl Ritter stood in a muddy trench, his rifle resting on his knees. He thought the signal was fake, another trick. Just yesterday, they had been told to hold the line. Now, it was over. The men beside him said nothing. Their faces were blank, their eyes hollow. The wind carried no sound of battle anymore. Only a dog barked somewhere far away. At the same hour, in the northern port of Narvik, an Abwehr officer returned from headquarters pale and silent. He whispered the same words to his men. Some laughed, a dry and nervous laugh. Others took off their helmets and sat down on the cold ground. One soldier murmured, "If this is true, then everything we lived for was a lie." In Berlin, where the ruins still smoked, people crowded around broken radios. The voice of Admiral Dönitz came through the static, calm, resigned, stripped of pride. He spoke of a necessary decision. No one cried victory. An old woman, her coat burned and torn, looked at the ruins and said, "Then my son died for nothing." Those words, "for nothing," echoed across the land. In every shattered city, in every silent village, they hung in the air like ashes. South of Munich, General von Grunewald listened to the message in his field headquarters. He said nothing. He placed his pistol on the table. Everyone in the room held their breath. But he did not pull the trigger. He only said quietly, "We lost more than the war. We lost our soul." In Prague, German units were still fighting against the uprising. The radio ordered them to stop. Their commander shouted, "Lies! Russian propaganda!" But hours later, a courier arrived with the signed document, Keitel's signature, unconditional surrender. The officer took off his iron cross, threw it into the mud, and whispered, "Then it's true." At Hamburg, German soldiers surrendered to the British. One of them, a young man named Hans, raised his hands and began to cry. An English officer looked at him and saw not an enemy, just a boy. Hans kept repeating, "Maybe now I can see my mother." Across Germany, chaos took shape. Some rejoiced, not in victory but in relief. Others wept, not knowing what tomorrow would bring. The radios kept repeating the same words, "The war is over, Germany has surrendered." But many refused to listen. In Leipzig, a student named Lotta ran into the street and shouted, "We are free." Her neighbor, a widow, turned to her and said, "Free from what?" Lotta fell silent. The question hung heavier than the smoke above them. By evening, the news reached every corner of the country. People crawled out of cellars, blinking at the daylight. Roads filled with soldiers heading nowhere. Some wanted to reach the Americans. At least there, they said, one might survive. Others fled east, afraid of vengeance. At Magdeburg station, a woman held her son's hand. She said softly, "Remember this day. Everything ends today." The boy didn't understand. He only saw his mother crying for the first time, not from fear, but from release. In every headquarters, silence ruled. Maps no longer mattered. Lines, arrows, colors, all meaningless now. In Kiel, a naval captain was ordered to lower his flag. He stood on deck, unable to give the command. The flag hung motionless, as if it too refused to fall. In Vienna, a young officer stood by the ruins of the opera house. From a cellar below came the sound of a violin, playing Beethoven. He took off his cap and listened. There, in that trembling melody, was something no speech could give: repentance. In Hamburg, the local station announced, "Combat has ceased." People stepped outside. Some hugged strangers. A woman began to hand out bread, her only loaf. It was the first act of kindness anyone had seen in years. But not all surrendered to peace. In the Bavarian Alps, fanatical units still fought. Their captain shouted, "Whoever surrenders is already dead." By morning, most of his men were gone. They had simply walked away. In Flensburg, the last capital of the Reich, Admiral Dönitz signed the final orders. His secretary asked, "What should I write for the report?" He answered, "Write one word, end." That night, the guns fell silent. For the first time in 6 years, Europe heard the wind again, and church bells, not as warnings, but as farewells. Still, many refused to believe. In a school near Nuremberg, children were drawing tanks. The teacher entered and said, "Children, the war is over." No one reacted. He tore down the map of Europe and said, "Then we start again." Every German faced that day differently. For some, it was freedom. For others, humiliation. But for all, it was disbelief. Because how could something that vast, that total, simply stop? Night came. In Berlin, people sat around fires among the ruins. A veteran of the Great War said softly, "We thought we could fix our past. We only made it worse." In Silesia, Captain Gerhard wrote in his diary, "It is over. We have lost everything except shame." Soviet soldiers found his words days later. In a camp near Thuringia, captured officers listened as a guard read the headline aloud. "Germany surrenders unconditionally." One asked, "What will happen to us now?" The guard shrugged. "You live, that's enough." In Cologne, a crowd gathered before the ruined cathedral. No one spoke. Then the organ played, faint, broken, but human. Someone began to hum along. The sound spread through the streets, fragile yet alive. In Bavaria, a farmer opened his barn and released prisoners he had hidden for months. "Go," he told them, "it's over." They hesitated, then stepped into the sunlight. In Hamburg, firefighters fought a simple house fire, not bombs. A woman brought them water and said, "We are people again." In Copenhagen, German troops stacked their rifles before the British. One looked out to sea and whispered, "The sea stayed the same. Only we changed." All through the night, the country moved like a restless sleeper. Footsteps echoed in empty streets. People wandered aimlessly, searching for faces, for meaning, for a future. In Leipzig, an old woman took out a dress she had hidden since before the war. She put it on and told her granddaughter, "We will live again." In Königsberg, a young soldier stared across the dark water. He said quietly, "We have lost our honor." Another replied, "No, we have lost our illusions." Everywhere, radios spoke the same message. No one cheered, because no one yet knew how to be happy. General Sperl told his aide, "History will judge us." The aide answered, "It already has." At dawn on May 9th, the sun rose over Europe. German soldiers laid down their arms. One whispered, "The sun still rises, but I am no longer a soldier." That sentence became the symbol of an ending. Slowly, cities began to breathe again. Children's laughter returned. Plates clattered. The sound of water running from a tap became a miracle. Life returned, cautious, unsure, like a wounded animal stepping from its cage. But memory stayed. Walls bore the marks of bullets. Faces carried scars of silence. And yet, within that silence, something new was born, humility. Defeat had become redemption. Only by losing could Germany remember how to be human. By evening, Dönitz wrote in his journal, "We lost an empire. Maybe we saved the future." That night, above Germany, the first peaceful planes crossed the sky, not bombers, but transports carrying bread. People looked up and wept. In Berlin, a boy drew a sun on a brick wall. His mother said, "Now it won't hide anymore." And for the first time in years, silence no longer meant fear. It meant life. May the 8th, a day of ashes and awakening, the day a nation faced its reflection, the day the noise stopped and the world could finally listen. The war ended, the silence began, and in that silence the world was reborn.